Hiya, teacher friends. So let's talk a little bit more about shy students. In order for you to avoid those awkward conversational lessons where your students are not giving anything back to what you put in, today I'm going to follow up on my previous video about how to deal with shy students. I'm going to give you a few more tips and I'm going to explain a few more reasons why your students may not be talking too much. So with that being said, hit the subscribe button, support the channel, and let's get started. First of all, some of this has been said in my other video, other things weren't, so I'm just going to go through it. Certain reasons why your students may be shy include, number one, the fact that you're an authority figure. Certain students, especially children, may be intimidated by the fact that you're an authority figure. They have not socialized with adults too often, and they may be a little bit worried about how much they're allowed to say. Another reason is that some students actually get in trouble for saying more than what they're asked to say in classes. There could be a cultural or institutional aspect to this. Some students do not talk unless if they are spoken to. So they do not overshare, they do not voluntarily share bits of information unless if you actually ask them for it. So the first thing that we need to work on, and what I'll be talking about today, is how to, as organically as possible, get your students to voluntarily share information about themselves in order to keep the conversation flowing and to avoid any awkward pauses. Another couple of things to keep in mind is the fact that awkward pauses aren't awkward for everybody. Some people actually enjoy pauses in the conversation. They are not so extroverted. And finally, it's important to keep in mind that you may be speaking too much, and that may be the reason why your students aren't actually putting too much into the conversation, because they expect that you're going to pick up the slack. Okay, without further ado, here are some tips for you. This is specifically if you are teaching children, particularly, because there's a difference between dealing with shy adults and dealing with shy children. This is also if you have tried all of the tips I've given in the other video and it still hasn't worked. This is kind of the last-ditch effort to get your students to talk. So here are a few strategies I've implemented in my lessons. Number one, using the word because. So this takes some specific instruction. If you notice that your students are not they're giving you one-word answers. They are giving you maybe the two-word answers, or like very, very short answers, and you want them to expand on the information, on the answers that they're giving you. Teach them explicitly to use the word because, right? And this will come with you actually asking them specifically to do this. I know it feels fake, it feels fabricated at the beginning, but again, let's think about the common reasons why your students do not use because in the first place. Sometimes they don't think that they're welcome to. Some of them come from environments where authority, you don't speak unless if you're spoken to, unless if you're asked. You need to specifically allow your students to know that they are allowed to share, that you want to know what they have to say. So use the word because, yeah? So for example, anytime that you ask them a question, it could be, what kind of food do you like, right? And they just say pizza, because, and this may take a few cycles of you saying because, right? Instead of asking them, oh, why? Because if you ask them why, then they're going to get into the habit of having to be asked a question before they could give that extra bit of information. However, if you use the word because, then you are scaffolding. You are helping them continue their answer and to create a complex sentence, a long, more fulfilling answer. And in the long run, through repetition, through routine, after 2 or 3 lessons, they will start to get used to using the word because, they will get used to giving more information, and this will allow them to feel more confident and comfortable in class. And ideally, after a while, they will feel that they could voluntarily use it without being prompted to do so. With that being said, don't overdo it. As I said, this is for like last ditch effort. You've built rapport with the students, you've shared your kind of own information, you have tried all the other strategies, then this is what you go to. You teach them to use the word because. But you might not want to do this with every single answer because it might intimidate your students, and then they could get used to being prompted by you to use because and to continue the sentence. And then it's not voluntary anymore, right? So we want to try to maybe start off with every 3 answers when they don't voluntarily explain why they have a certain opinion. You use the word because, and then they continue the answer. You tell them, good job, well done. So you do that every 3 answers maybe, or every 4 answers, yeah. And then after that, if they're not catching on, then you explain to them again. You give them explicit instruction. Hey, I want to know why. So you could tell me. Again, welcome their answers. Tell them that you would like to know this information. And then eventually, through trial and error and through more practice, it should catch on, and it should become kind of like automated, that every time you ask them, who's your favorite actor? It will say Johnny Depp because he was in Pirates of the Caribbean, for example. So that's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2, this is answering a question with a question. Yeah, and this is a simple formula. This is what happens quite often just in normal conversation anyway. Somebody asks you a question, what kind of color, what's your favorite color? You tell them my favorite color is green, or let's just say red today. And then you ask them, what is your favorite color, right? Again, this could be a thing that does not come naturally to your students. So practicing this and giving your students specific instruction could be useful. I know it feels fabricated, just like using because, but after a while, hopefully it will become natural and your students will catch on. So what I would do, I would start by just explaining, when I ask you a question, I would like for you to ask a question back. And maybe you could do that 5 times or 10 times with simple questions like, where do you live? I live in Hong Kong. Where do you live, right? What's your favorite animal? My favorite animal is a dog. What's yours, right? So you could just practice that, because recognize that a lot of your students don't even have experience with asking questions voluntarily. They honestly don't. Like they have practice asking questions maybe in group work, in class maybe, but a lot of your students, especially the children, could come from environments where there is basically no speaking in their classes, and when they are speaking, if they are speaking, it's just like presentation, so it's all affirmative. So they are not using any questions. They are not using the interrogative forms. So it could take a little bit of creativity. It could take a little bit of comfort and confidence. But if you could get them into this routine, I guess, to ask questions, then after a couple classes, just like with the first strategy, it could start to sink in. Strategy number 3, giving examples. Yeah. So this could be when they're answering a question and they should give an example. This is another way to kind of lengthen their questions and to improve their fluency as well, to speak in more full, well-structured sentences, right? So you could ask them a question like, what kind of holidays do you like to go on? I like to go to hot places. For example, I went to Costa Rica last year, right? So asking questions and giving examples, this is a great way to improve your students' fluency. Just like with because and with the questions, you should model this for your students. Give them a few examples first before you expect them to actually do it, right? And then just go through this 5 or 10 times, practices. And if you ask them the correct questions, then they will be able to give examples. But keep that in mind too. Some questions are easier than others to give examples for, right? So it's important for you as a teacher to ask them the correct questions. For example, if you ask them, what color do you like? And they say blue, it's going to be a little bit difficult for them to give examples of why they like the color blue. Like maybe they could say, I like blue things. For example, the sky is blue, that's why. But see, you're stretching your imagination a little bit more, and your students are already just trying to get the language down. So getting them to stretch their imagination so much could be a little bit difficult. So serve it to them on a silver platter. Write out a few, maybe 5 or 10 questions that could be easy to give examples for. It works very well when you give them options, okay? So you could say, do you like hot seasons or cold seasons? I like cold seasons. For example, the winter, yeah? Do you like, let's say, wild animals or domestic animals, if they know what that is? I prefer wild animals, for example, wolves, right? So giving them options, that's a great way to practice giving examples. Number 4, and perhaps the most cringy of all, small talk. Small talk simulation. Yeah, this one, it hurts every time I have to do it, but again, it gets my students talking and it gets them practicing their fluency, their conversational fluency and their conversational etiquette. So I have some students who I will ask them like, hey, how are you? Good. And that's it. So practicing, a little bit of small talk and practicing explaining where it is appropriate to reciprocate questions and to ask your teacher questions as well. So how are you? I'm good. How are you? And this kind of goes into answering a question with a question, like we were speaking about in strategy number 2, but it's specifically letting them know different small talk topics, right? So a common question is, what did you do on the weekend? What will you do this weekend? Questions like that. If you could think of 5 small talk topics, what did you do at school? How was work? And if you could just get them, just go through these and practice these topics, and that could be very useful to do with your students. All right, so there is one thing that I want to keep in mind while we're going through all of this. It's to recognize that we are not trying to change our students culturally, right? And a lot of our students do come from cultures or do come from just regions where some of these rules, there are a lot of shades of gray, and it's not necessarily right nor wrong to ask questions, for example, to reciprocate information, to offer information. This could be very culturally based, right? But it's good to let your students know that they are in an environment where they are allowed to do that and that you are open to this, right? So your students may not take you up on the offer, and it may get to a point where it is just you asking questions and them answering questions. And then in that situation, you may have to integrate some different activities and tasks just to keep the ball rolling and to give them enough content to speak about. That's completely okay as well. But the goal, for me as a teacher at least, is to give my students opportunities where they could practice the language, is opportunities to actually speak. So for me, this is not about cultural integration necessarily. Some of my students want that, especially the adults, but particularly with shy students, it just comes to giving more opportunities to speak, to develop their pronunciation abilities, their fluency ability, and that comes from practice, right? And if they are answering with one-word answers, we do have to go into, we have to go into the red zone. We have to go to the last-ditch effort, like I spoke about today, to really try to get them to engage in the conversation. And these are some core strategies that I've used with my students, and I've seen it work. All right, so teachers, I hope that helped you out. If you have any questions or any suggestions on how to improve your students' fluency, especially with shy students and to avoid awkward lessons, just throw it down in the box below. Consider subscribing to the channel so you could get more tips and tricks on being a teacher, an online teacher, more specifically an iTalki teacher. And until next time, keep smiling.